She has no idea what she's doing with that money. My brother didn't even lower his voice when he said it. He was standing 3 feet away from me in the hallway outside the notary's office, talking to our uncle like I was furniture. I didn't turn around. I checked my phone. 12 minutes. That's how long it would take before everything he thought he owned stopped being his. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever watched someone you grew up with look straight through you like you're nothing and had to stand there and take it? Drop a yes in the comments if you know that specific kind of hollow feeling. I want to know how many of us have been in that hallway. My brother Marcus was 41 years old, wore a Tag Heuer he couldn't quite afford, and had spent the better part of a decade positioning himself as the family's financial mind. He managed the rental properties. He handled the paperwork. He attended every single one of our mother's medical appointments in the last 2 years of her life. Not because he was devoted, but because he understood that proximity to a dying woman with assets is its own kind of currency. I am 32. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the East End of Ottawa. I take the O train to work. I buy my coffee from the Tim Hortons on Rado, not the boutique place 2 blocks over. Marcus had used these facts as punchlines for years. At Christmas dinners, at birthday gatherings, at the kind of family events where everyone laughs a little too loudly and drinks a little too much. "Claire's still doing the budget lifestyle," he'd say, and the aunts would smile politely and change the subject. He thought I was losing. He had absolutely no idea I was keeping score. Our mother, Diane, passed away 14 months ago. Breast cancer, stage 4, 18 months, from diagnosis to the end. She was 67, sharp until nearly the last week, and she loved Marcus with a specific and exhausting devotion that I had long since made peace with. He was the eldest. He was the one who called every Sunday. He was the one who called every Sunday. He was the one who showed up. At least, that's how it appeared. What nobody in our family knew, what I had spent 11 months quietly verifying, was that Marcus had been systematically redirecting funds from our mother's estate accounts for at least the last year of her life. Not dramatically, not all at once, the kind of financial erosion that looks, from a distance, like normal estate management. A transfer here described as property maintenance, a withdrawal there labeled medical coordination fees. Small enough that a grieving family wouldn't look twice. Consistent enough that over 14 months it added up to just over $430,000. I knew because I am a forensic accountant. I have been a forensic accountant for 7 years, working quietly for a mid-sized firm in Ottawa that is hired, primarily by insurance companies and estate lawyers, to find exactly this kind of thing. Marcus knew I worked in accounting. He did not know what kind. I had never corrected him. It felt, for a long time, like information I was saving for something. Turns out I was right. The meeting today was supposed to be the formal reading of our mother's will and the beginning of estate distribution. Marcus had scheduled it. Marcus had chosen the notary. Marcus had sent me a calendar invite with the tone of someone doing me a favor. What Marcus did not know was that I had already met with our mother's original estate lawyer, not the one Marcus had started using in her final months. A man named Gerald who had an office in Kanata and a habit of not making eye contact, but her original lawyer, Patricia, whom our mother had trusted for 20 years. Patricia had reached out to me 8 months ago with a question she said she couldn't shake. She'd been quietly removed from our mother's file 6 weeks before Diane died. Marcus had told Diane that Patricia was retiring. Patricia was not retiring. I spent the next 7 months building a paper trail that would hold up. I want to explain something about the way I worked during those months because it matters. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't warn him. I didn't call family meetings or send emotional text messages at midnight. I became completely unremarkable. When Marcus called, which was infrequent and always slightly condescending, I was pleasant and vague. When the aunts asked how I was handling the grief, I said I was taking it one day at a time. When our Uncle Raymond pulled me aside at a cousin's engagement party and said, gently, that Marcus was concerned about my mental state and thought maybe I needed help processing the loss, I thanked him and said I'd think about it. In psychology, they call it the gray rock method. You make yourself uninteresting. You give the person who feeds on your reactions nothing to consume. I had read about it in the context of personal relationships, but it works just as well as a professional strategy. Marcus stopped worrying about me. He stopped watching, and I kept working. The will, as Patricia helped me confirm, had been amended. Not the original will, the original was still valid, But a secondary document had been introduced into the estate file in the final weeks of our mother's life, when Diane was on palliative doses of hydromorphone and receiving hospice care at home. This amendment redirected a significant portion of the estate's liquid assets into a jointly held account that Marcus had set up, framed as a care management fund. Gerald had notarized it. The timing was, to put it in professional terms, deeply suspicious. I had spent 4 months working with Patricia and a forensic document examiner to establish a timeline. I had spent 2 months working with a lawyer named Stephanie, who specialized in estate litigation in Ontario, to understand exactly what the threshold was between civil dispute and criminal fraud. The number I needed to hit, the number that moved this from a family disagreement into something that would result in real consequences, was substantial enough that a premature intervention would have let Marcus walk away with a reprimand and a repayment schedule. So I waited. I let the transfers continue. I documented everyone. I watched the total climb past the threshold that triggers criminal fraud charges under the Criminal Code of Canada. I filed a formal complaint with the Ontario government's Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee 3 months before today's meeting. I had been in contact with the Ottawa Police Service Financial Crimes Unit for 6 weeks. Today was not a will reading. Today was a closing. The notary's office was in a low building near the Queensway, the kind of place with beige carpet and a water cooler and framed certificates on the wall. Marcus arrived 8 minutes before me with Gerald in tow, already deep in a conversation that stopped the moment I walked in. Our Uncle Raymond was there, along with 2 of our mother's sisters, Aunt Phyllis and Aunt Bev. Marcus had assembled witnesses, just like our father had assembled his gallery. Family as set dressing. Family as set dressing. Family as pressure. I set my bag down at the table and nodded hello. Claire. Marcus said my name the way people say it when they mean something else. Glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it, I said. He studied me for a moment, looking for the tremor, the redness around the eyes, some evidence that the year had broken me properly. I gave him nothing. I looked back at him with the specific blankness of someone who has already finished doing the math. Gerald opened his folder. He began explaining the amendment to the will, the care management fund, the process by which the estate assets would be transferred. He used a lot of words like pursuant to and as duly authorized and consistent with the wishes of the deceased. He did not look up from his papers very often. Marcus watched me the whole time. He was waiting for the moment I realized what I'd lost. He thought today was about money. He thought today was about our mother's house in Barrhaven, the RRSPs, the investment accounts she'd built over 40 years of working as a nurse at the Ottawa hospital. He thought he had already won, and today was just the paperwork. Does anyone have questions before we proceed? Gerald asked. I opened my bag. I placed a folder on the table, not dramatically, the way you'd set down a coffee mug. I have a few things to add to the record, I said. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Claire, this isn't the time for... The amendment dated October 14th, I said, keeping my voice level and quiet, was executed while our mother was receiving 60 milligrams of hydromorphone daily through a palliative care protocol. I have her medical records here. I slid a copy across to Gerald. Her attending physician, Dr. Anand, at Brouillard Continuing Care, has provided a sworn affidavit that she was not legally competent to execute financial documents during that period. That document is also in the folder. The room went very still. Aunt Phyllis set down her paper cup of water. The original will, drafted by Patricia and last updated by our mother 18 months before her death, leaves the estate divided equally between Marcus and myself, with specific bequests to each of you, I continued, nodding toward Phyllis and Bev. It is valid. It has not been legally superseded. Marcus pushed back from the table. She's been planning this. He looked at Raymond. I told you she was unstable. She's been sitting on this, building some kind of case. This is harassment, Gerald. Tell her this is harassment. Gerald was looking at the medical records. Gerald was not saying anything. Furthermore, I said, because I had not finished, I am submitting to this proceeding a 14-month financial audit of the estate accounts, including the care management fund established by Marcus in September of last year. I placed the second document on the table. Over the course of 14 months, $431,000 was transferred out of estate-linked accounts into an account registered under Marcus's name and a numbered corporation registered in Alberta. The transfers are documented in detail, including dates, amounts, and the account records of the receiving corporation. Aunt Bev made a sound that was not quite a word. Marcus stood up. Those transfers were authorized. I was managing Mom's affairs. I had power of attorney. You had a power of attorney document signed under the same conditions as the amendment, I said. Dr. Annan's affidavit covers that instrument as well. This is insane. He turned to Gerald. She's fabricated this. She works in accounting. She has access to. She manufactured this whole thing. Gerald looked up. For the first time all morning, he looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thibodeau, he said quietly, I need you to stop talking. I want you to think about the kind of silence that falls in a room when a lawyer tells his own client to stop talking. It doesn't sound like nothing. It sounds like a door closing. Raymond had gone pale. Phyllis was looking at Marcus with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Something cautious and recalibrating. Bev had her hands folded on the table and was staring at the audit documents like she was reading something she didn't want to finish. Marcus sat back down slowly. He looked at me with something that had moved past arrogance into something raw. He was starting to understand that this wasn't an ambush. This was a verdict being read aloud. Why? Raymond said finally, his voice careful. Why didn't you say something sooner, if you knew? Because I needed it to be undeniable, I said. I wasn't unkind when I said it. I understood the question. A civil dispute over one transfer would have been he said, she said. Estate litigation can take years, and the outcome is never certain. I needed a complete picture. I needed every document, every transfer, every timestamp. I needed it to be the kind of evidence that doesn't leave room for interpretation. I looked at Marcus. I also needed the amount to cross the threshold for criminal fraud under Section 380 of the Criminal Code. It needed to exceed $100,000, and the pattern needed to establish intent. $431,000 moved through a corporation over 14 months using a fraudulently obtained power of attorney. That's not a mistake. That's not a misunderstanding. That establishes intent clearly enough that the Crown can proceed. Marcus had stopped looking at me. He was looking at the table. I filed a complaint with the Public Guardian and Trustee's office in March. I continued. I've been in contact with the Financial Crimes Unit at Ottawa Police for 6 weeks. They have copies of everything in this folder. Today's meeting was already on their radar. Gerald stood up. He gathered his papers with the movements of a man who understands that the building he's standing in is about to be condemned and would very much like to exit before that happens. I need to make a phone call, he said to no one in particular, and walked out of the room. Marcus watched him go. Marcus, I said, and he looked up at me. For a moment, I saw my brother. Not the man who had spent 10 years treating me like a footnote, but the kid who used to sleep with the light on until he was 12 and who cried at the end of every hockey season when it meant summer was coming. I acknowledged that memory, and I set it aside, because the person across the table from me had made his choices with full knowledge and full intention, and the fact that he was also my brother did not change the arithmetic. The original will stands, I said. Patricia is prepared to file the application to restore it. You will need to retain your own counsel, and I'd suggest doing that today. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Raymond with an expression that was asking for something, intervention, maybe, or just the basic comfort of someone in the room still being on his side. Raymond looked down at his hands. There are people who, when they are cornered, find a kind of terrible energy. They recalculate. They look for the exit they haven't tried yet. Marcus was that kind of person. I watched him find it. He reached into his jacket and put a single piece of paper on the table. She signed this, he said. His voice had dropped, but there was something new in it. 2 years ago, right after the diagnosis, Mom was scared and she asked me to handle everything, and she signed a family financial agreement giving me discretionary authority over the estate during her illness. Claire witnessed it. He slid it toward me. Your signature is right there. I remembered the document. I remembered the afternoon, our mother in her kitchen in Barhaven, 3 weeks after diagnosis, frightened in the specific way that people are frightened when the timeline of their life becomes suddenly concrete. Marcus had brought papers. He said they were to help organize things. I had skimmed. I had signed because our mother was crying and I wanted the afternoon to be over. I had found that document 8 months ago in my own files. I had spent some time with it. That agreement, I said, is not a legal instrument under Ontario estate law. A family financial agreement without independent legal advice, without an estate lawyer's oversight, Executed without disclosure of all assets, it carries no weight in probate proceedings. I paused. I have an opinion letter from Stephanie confirming that. It's in the supplementary folder. I slid the second folder across the table. Marcus stared at it. He didn't open it. I also want you to know, I said, that I bought the mortgage on the Barhaven house 6 weeks ago. Mom's property had a small outstanding line of credit secured against it. The bank sold that note. I purchased it. I let that land, which means that whatever share of the property you receive through the estate, and given the fraud findings, that may be nothing. You will be dealing with me as a creditor regardless. Phyllis said, very quietly. Oh, Marcus. He flinched. That, more than anything I'd said, seemed to reach him. Not the legal documents, not the audit, not the police contact, the way our mother's sister said his name. He looked at me and I think he wanted to say something about what I owed him for the years he showed up, for the Sunday calls, for the presents he provided that I hadn't. I think he wanted to make an argument about sacrifice and about how the weight of the family hadn't been distributed equally and how none of this would have happened if I had just been there more. I could see it forming. I spoke first. I was there, I said. I was there in every way you didn't notice. I was there for 11 months building the case that proves what you did to her. I was there when Patricia called me, scared, because she'd been pushed out of Mom's file by someone she'd trusted. I was there every time you transferred money out of accounts. Mom spent 40 years billing. I was there, Marcus. You just weren't watching. The door opened. A woman in plain clothes came in first, followed by 2 officers from the Ottawa Police Service. She identified herself by name and unit. She said Marcus's full name. She told him he was being arrested for fraud over $5,000, breach of trust, and criminal breach of power of attorney. She told him he had the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. Raymond stood up and then seemed to not know what to do standing up, so he sat back down. Marcus didn't say anything. He looked at his hands while they read him his rights. He looked like a man who has just understood, fully and finally, that the thing he was certain was a problem with a solution is actually just a consequence. I didn't watch them take him out. I turned to face the window. Outside, Bank Street was doing what it always does on a Thursday morning in Ottawa. Buses, pedestrians, the low gray sky pressing down on everything with a kind of steady indifference. It was not a dramatic sky. It was just the regular sky that had been there all morning while I did what I came here to do. Aunt Bev touched my arm gently before she left. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Patricia called that afternoon. The original will application would go forward within the week. The numbered corporation in Alberta had already been flagged by the CRA. That had been a separate tip I had filed 2 months ago. Because one problem at a time is not always an option when the problems are interconnected. I walked home from Stephanie's office because I needed the air. Down Elgin Street, past the coffee shops and the dog walkers and the people eating lunch outside, even though it was barely warm enough for it. The way Canadians start eating outside the moment the temperature reaches anything above 10 degrees. Because winter is long and the windows on the restaurant were folded open, and why not? I thought about my mother. I thought about the kitchen in Barhaven, where she used to make butter tarts at Christmas and leave them on the counter to cool and pretend she didn't know we were taking them before dinner. I thought about the last good conversation I had with her, 3 weeks before the end, when she squeezed my hand and said she knew I'd be fine. I had thought at the time that she was talking about grief. I think now she may have been talking about something else. I stopped at the Tim Hortons on Rado. I ordered a medium coffee. I sat by the window for a while. There's a version of this story where I feel triumphant, where I walk out of that office and the city looks different, and I feel the particular high of having been completely right about everything. That version exists. But it sits underneath something heavier, which is the knowledge that the person I had to do this to was someone I shared a childhood with, someone who slept with the light on, someone who used to be a kid in the same house as me before money and fear and proximity to inheritance turned him into someone I had to treat as a liability. Peace is not a feeling that arrives. It's something you have to build the conditions for. I had spent 11 months building the conditions. The feeling would come eventually. For now, there was medium coffee and the Thursday sky and the knowledge that the work was done. If you've ever had to be the one who documents instead of the one who erupts, if you've ever had to be patient when everything in you wanted to confront, drop a comment. Tell me how long it took. I want to know I'm not the only one who understands that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait until you can't be ignored. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the audit, not the legal strategy, not even the timing. Though all of those mattered, what made the difference was a decision I made very early on, when I was still raw with grief and sitting in my apartment at 2 in the morning, reading through financial records with a cup of tea gone cold beside me. I decided that I was going to be the kind of person the situation required, not the kind of person my emotions wanted me to be. That's harder than it sounds. When someone who shares your blood treats you like a problem to be managed, every instinct you have wants to respond in kind. You want to confront, you want to call, you want to send the message at midnight that says, I know what you're doing and you should stop. I felt all of that. I chose none of it. Not because I was suppressing myself, but because I understood, even then, that the only thing that would actually matter was the thing I could prove. There's a principle I've come to believe in deeply, and it has nothing to do with luck or fate or any outside force delivering consequences on your behalf. It has to do with the simple, observable fact that the choices people make accumulate. Every decision Marcus made to redirect a transfer, to remove Patricia from the file, to introduce a document while our mother was too ill to understand what she was signing. Each one of those was a choice that created a reality. And every decision I made, to document instead of confront, to wait instead of react, to build instead of react, to build instead of burn, created a different reality running alongside his, quietly, until the two realities met in a beige-carpeted office near the Queensway on a Thursday morning. That is not karma in any mystical sense. It is just the architecture of consequences. What you build is what you stand on. What you erode is what eventually gives way beneath you. The ethics of what I did matter to me. I want to be honest about that. There were moments when waiting felt like complicity, when I watched another transfer clear and thought, I am letting this happen. I had to remind myself, repeatedly, that the goal was not to feel righteous in the short term. The goal was to make it impossible for it to happen again, not just to me, but to anyone else he might have tried this with next. A slap on the wrist and a repayment plan would not have accomplished that. A criminal fraud charge does. Intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause harm. I watched Marcus be intelligent for years. He was organized, strategic, persuasive. He understood systems and how to work within them. But he used all of that in the direction of taking from people who trusted him. And that is not intelligence in any meaningful sense. That is just capability pointed the wrong way. What I want people to take from Claire's story, from my story, is not that patience always wins, or that the truth always comes out, because sometimes it doesn't, and that is a real and painful fact. What I want people to take is that the work of becoming someone who cannot be dismissed, cannot be overlooked, cannot be easily defeated, that work is always worth doing. You do it in the years before you need it. You do it quietly, without an audience. You build the folder before anyone asks to see it. The strongest position you can be in is the one where you already finished the work while everyone else assumed you hadn't started.